Satisfactory Update 1.1 has essentially added a bunch of fan-loved mods as official features. One of these mods was a cinematic camera. This is now free to use in experimental and soon in the main game. This is a dedicated tutorial on everything to do with the free cam, aka Dolly mode, in Satisfactory. If you would like to see a video that solely focuses on photo mode that goes over all the new color and effect filters plus a lot more, then check out the video on screen. But without further ado, let's begin. So let's start at the very beginning, and it's very important to go over the actual basics of the cinematic camera. And to access that camera, we have to open up our photo mode by pressing the P button and then the tab button. You should then see two different settings. You got the camera and the image settings here as well, which is where you see all the color filters and effect filters, which I will talk a little bit about later on. But for as of right now, the only setting I want to try and change is this. We want to go from first person mode to decoupled mode, which essentially is like a 3D camera where you're split from your actual Pioneer. This has given us two new settings, Pioneer and Dolly settings. Why is that so important? Well, this is why. When we open up our Pioneer setting, essentially we can choose a bunch of different poses for our actual Pioneer itself. I'm just going to stick with this one personally. But when it comes to the Dolly settings, essentially this is our cinematic camera. So the most basic cinematic shot you can film is by setting a random start location right there, flying east, west, north, south, up, down, wherever you want to go personally. I'm going to go over here. Then set endpoints. Remember it, start points, end points. Then if you want to go towards the very start of the shot, press this button right here like so. Then press play. Then press T to get rid of all the UI, and there you go. You filmed yourself the most basic cinematic shot, and we are barely 2 minutes into the video. However, like I mentioned, that is very, very basic. I want to actually up the duration. The highest you can go is 20 seconds, and the lowest duration is 1 second. So I want to go with 20 because I find the longer shots more cinematic personally, so I'm going to go with that. And I will be talking about all of this a little bit later on here as well. Let's just make sure all of this is completely fine, and yeah, look at that. I think that looks really, really cool personally, and this is the most basic setting. You guys saw how easy that was to set up. It literally took me 5 seconds to do, and already, this is fantastic. However, let's say that you want a cinematic shot that's only focusing on your Pioneer. This doesn't just work for the Pioneer, it could focus on a wall, it could focus on a sign, or really any actual object itself. But for this example, I want it to actually be on the Pioneer. Well, for that, I'm then going to enable this setting right here, which is called Set Tracking Point, and of course, lock onto Tracking Point as well. So let's set that to that. The start point is going to be there, and see how I'm not looking at the Pioneer as of right now. I'm going to set the end point there. However, because we've turned on these features, what that's going to mean is that the camera is automatically going to track the object that you've selected. And yes, that also includes things like vehicles and signs like I was mentioning a bit earlier on there as well. For example, we'll start off by looking at this sign, we'll open up Dolly settings, then make sure that, as you can see there by the white square, is tracking that sign. We're then going to select start point right there, we're going to go backwards here a little bit, and then just like so, that's where our end point is then going to be. You can then start it and it's going to snap straight onto there as well, which might not look too good from this point of view, but when you actually go towards the sign, it looks like you are a vehicle traveling along the road, which I really end up enjoying. However, here's another example. I've just started my expansion to this project, which, by the way, I'm building a port live on both YouTube and on Twitch. So if you guys like Satisfactory, feel free to follow those two accounts. But regardless, I want to try and capture a before and after cinematic of this area right here. Of course, I could just walk around it, but it doesn't feel as dramatic, and I do want some nice B-roll to actually show for a future video. So how on earth am I going to do that? Well, let's combine everything we've learnt so far. Let's press P to access photo mode, tab to access the settings, decoupled mode to access Dolly settings, then just like that, we've now got everything in place. So let's start the cinematic there. Then let's end our cinematic somewhere up here, for example, just like so, whilst also making sure that we've set the camera to our Pioneer. Then what we can do now is change this to, let's say, 20, and there we go, we've got ourselves the cinematic shot of before we start our project. Then of course afterwards, I can then film the exact same shot. I know exactly where I'm sitting obviously, so all I've got to do is just position my Pioneer in the exact same place, then move the camera to the corner of the project so I know exactly where to end the shot. And just like that, you've got yourself a perfect cinematic intro and outro to a future build. First of all, that only took a couple seconds there as well. But let's delve a little bit more into the cinematic mode. And again, we're going to start off by pressing P, then Tab, then switching this to decoupled mode. Except, I don't want this shot to be filmed like this. I don't mind the pose, I don't mind the character looking towards the camera, that's completely fine. But this image in itself is looking a bit boring, a little bit bland. So instead, I'm actually going to change a couple settings down over here. Mostly the color filter and the effect filter. This essentially is one of the best features, in my opinion at least, in Satisfactory Update 1.1. Of course, I want you guys to mess around with this setting yourself, so I'm just going to choose a random setting, then come back when I find something that's decent. There we go, I quite like that. It's supposed to try and give off some sort of old VHS sort of look, so this is what we're going to end up going with. And in fact, if I really wanted to, I could change the pose of my Pioneer here as well. There we go, that's fine. Unlike the last couple of shots, I don't want my character to be the center of focus, so I'm going to start the dolly right there, and when we ignore the dreadful Z snapping that's appearing right there, we are then going to end the cinematic right there, like so. Change the duration length, and there we go. We've essentially got a cinematic of the road. It's a little bit blurry, there's not really too much we can do about that with this setting, but you get the idea. Also, I know that I talked about this in my photo mode tutorial, but it's rather important to bring it back up again. Let's say, for example, you really like this setting that you've got, and now you've exited the photo mode and you've lost all your settings, right? Well, actually no. Luckily, if you just press the P mode again, everything comes back. But if you really don't like what you've done here, all you have to do is just press the reset button and it resets everything. You can now mess around with all the images again. However, the last point I'll quickly mention is this. Let's say you've got a nice cinematic shot, however, you might have noticed that your character is actually in the way, and you don't want your character to be here and you don't want to redo the shot. That is not a problem. Even if you don't like the coloring or the effect filter you've got on, again, that's not a problem either. Press P, press Tab, and then when you go into this setting, again, make sure you're definitely in decoupled mode, just like that. You can still see your character right there in the background when the game wants to focus, right there. You don't want that. Go to Pioneer, hide Pioneer, perfect. You can also go into the image, you can then change it to sunset, let's say, for example. You can then replay the cinematic, and then just like that, it's exactly the way it was. You might have to mess around again with the duration of the cinematic shot, because sometimes that resets itself. But regardless, that's exactly the same shot, but with a different image, different background, different effects, and it's so extremely simple to change. So don't worry if, again, your Pioneer's in the way, or if you don't like the color or the effect. You can change all of that after you actually film the cinematic shot in itself. Just film the shot, then mess around with it afterwards, and you'll often end up with really cool looking shots with really not that much time or effort put into it, which is fantastic. Either way, if you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.